Community Strategic Plan is the community's vision for the Central Coast for the next 10 years. It's called One Central Coast because this is the first plan for the whole of the Central Coast. We are one region, one council and one community. We live in a special place here on the coast, one in which we want all members of our community to feel valued and have access to a range of opportunities to participate in the richness of community life. And every one of us can play a part in bringing this community vision to life.
If people feel part of a community in some way, they'll give without probably even knowing they're doing it.
I wanted to restore this building and get it back to what it was. It was the jewel of the crown and I wanted to get it back to that. Making a difference. I guess that's what we're really here for.
The smile on the faces when they see these engines and that bus coming around, they just love it.
If you're following what makes you happy and excited and interested, then you're definitely going to live a life that you will be thankful to have lived.
At the end of the day, we just had a good idea. We needed the support of many people to turn that great idea into a sustainable venture. My name's Tim Silverwood. I grew up on the Central Coast. It wasn't until I got a bit older and started travelling around the world I realised that what we had was so special because people don't always treat the environment as well as we do here on the Central Coast. Our programs have focused on going into schools and running events in communities. So we also have a huge global online audience. One man cannot solve these big global problems. It's going to take a tribe of people coming together to solve them. It's a really amazing and rewarding journey in spreading this message around the world.
I've always been on the coast and I've loved the coast. About 6 years ago I bought the Chapman building. I got the opportunity, I saw that it was for sale and I stood back on the car park up there and a village central and I looked down and I could just feel this was the place to be. I could just see what the town was. There's always these little niches that are going back and forth and I guess it's an obsession for all of us because we saw what Wyong was like and it's getting it to a place where we're proud to say we're from Wyong. Like it's become a real proud place to be.
My name's Chris Wallace. Myself and my wife, we own Community Fire Education and the Fun Engine. We educate the community in a different way. We teach people what to do in case of fire. One of the biggest things is our education bus. What we do, we go out to different fates, festivals, wherever we can go. When we do the bus sometimes, we get 2,000 through that bus. I just enjoy communicating and getting out there and just educating in a different way.
I'm Meredith Gilmore. I've lived on the coast since 2000, originally from Sydney. Chose the coast because it's close to Sydney, but it's got that more laid back kind of thing that I like. I like living in regional areas. I started visual art in my 40s. It's just so different from what I ever thought that I'd ever do, and it is what led me into thinking it would be great to talk to people in the arts on the radio. So I started doing some shows, particularly a program called Coast Arts, which was a new show, and I reached out into the community because I'm an artist as well. And I just felt like there was a lot of scope on the radio to do interviews with artists and poets and writers, and that's been going now for over 7 years.
My name is Shauna O'Brien. I am from the Central Coast of New South Wales on Dark and Young land, and I'm a dancer. As an Indigenous dancer, we're very inspired by the environment and where we come from, all of the trees, the way that they curve around all of the rocks and the sea faces, the beautiful water, the fresh air, and that plays a huge part in the creative process. I was lucky enough to study at NASA Dance College, which was a super incredible experience, and the facilities, the studios are really beautiful, the staff are incredible, and I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity. Through volunteering, I was able to meet a bunch of really great other young people in the community that are really passionate about helping other people, and that's a way of taking something that I'm very passionate about and sharing that with other people. No matter where I go to work or if I have to spend a lot of time in Sydney, I always come back to the Central Coast because it feels like home and it helps rejuvenate me.
One of the things about the Central Coast I've noticed as well, which is people are so helpful to each other. They collaborate, they are interested in going to each other's exhibitions, not just to see what people are doing, but so that there are people there. And you've got to be competitive, but you don't have to always be competitive with each other.
If you're in a position to make a difference, I guess you're obliged to make that difference, really. Just happy to, give it all I could, and it became, a local icon and a buzzing place to be.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this extraordinary council meeting for the 3rd of February 2022. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting today and pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. Now, I will declare the meeting open now and just remind people that the meeting is being webcast. And I remind those participating in the meeting that your image and what you say will be recorded and broadcast live to the public. So please be mindful of that. And of course, I would ask those, we're still very much under health orders, so we're restricted to the COVID in terms, we've got restrictions due to COVID, so please make sure that you respect the social distancing requirements and remain seated. I note that today that an open forum will not be held prior to the extraordinary meeting. However, we did encourage members of the public to address the council in the formal council meeting, of which we have one. Mr. Kevin Brooks will speak to us as we come to the agenda item in a moment. So before we get there, item 1.1 is disclosures of interest. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. I don't believe any of the staff have got any conflicts to disclose. So with that, I'll pass the resolution that is shown on the screen. We'll now move to the one big item which we have today, which is the consideration of submissions and adoption of the revised Community Strategic Plan, the delivery program for 2022 to 2025, which does include the operational plan 22-23, just for the 1 year, the resourcing strategy, and consideration of a special rate variation application to IPART. We have one public speaker, Mr. Kevin Brooks, and I'll just remind Mr. Brooks that it's 3 minutes, upon which a bell will rhyme and you chime, and I'll require you to finish up then. Mr. Brooks. And I think to speak, you take your mask off. It's, I'm sure you're like me, you find it very difficult, and particularly my glasses just fog up immediately. So.
Can I just say before I start, please don't start the clock, can I just say that I'm on a 1 hour parking, so if I do get up and leave when you're responding, it's not in protest at what you're saying. So. Mr. Administrator, you were quoted in Coast News on the 2nd of July as follows. The plan to repay loans includes writing off 40 million, selling assets of about 60 million, and paying off the rest, about 110 million, over a 10-year period, unquote. That arithmetic hasn't changed. 110 million from rates over 10 years is 11 million per year. But a 15% rate hike raises 26 million per year. So what is the other 15 million for? You've never explained that. The numbers do not lie. The bulk of this rate hike is not to repay loans, but to fund a recurring structural deficit. This structural deficit isn't through lack of revenue, because general rates have gone up by inflation or more. The council doesn't have a revenue problem. It has a management problem, a performance problem, and a productivity problem. These problems are compounded when new leaders seek to embrace, rather than change, a rotten culture. The planning documents before us today are a dog's breakfast. 48 strategic objectives, which don't pass the SMART test, and about 190 vaguely worded projects. There's no prioritisation and no strategic resource allocation to align scarce resources with priorities. If everything in these documents is a priority, then nothing is a priority. In fact, the only discernible priority in these documents is slugging the ratepayer. To this end, public engagement has become a tool for hard sell and persuasion rather than genuine consultation. But the community hasn't been fooled. Even the council's hand-picked sample group, who were fed spin and propaganda before being asked their opinions, rejected the rate hike option. These poor people were given just two options: rate hikes or service cuts. It must have felt to them like a schoolboy bully pulling them in an arm lock and saying, "Give me your pocket money or I'll break your arm." But a majority still voted for the so-called deteriorate option rather than rate hikes, and by a similar margin in percentage terms to that considered an irreversible mandate by the UK in its 2016 Brexit referendum. The report before us today ignores that result, highlighting instead responses to loaded questions about services that did not even include a price tag. Well, of course, residents don't want service cuts, but they've also told you loud and clear they don't expect to pay 15% more for services that have already been cut. That's why, in a really extraordinary piece of feedback, and without any prompting, almost 30% wrote comments arguing for reduced internal costs and greater efficiency, even though you never offered that as one of the options. Mr. Administrator, the reports before us ignore and misrepresent the sentiment of the community. Of course, your senior managers prefer rate hikes to the hard work of improving productivity and efficiency as requested by IPART. But the community has spoken, and it is time to put their interests above those of a bureaucracy that both caused and benefited from the original deficits.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sticking to time. You did very well, and you certainly got your points across. So you may sit down now. Back. I guess it's interesting because from my point of view, I have spent a lot of this period of time over the last weeks talking with members in the community, meeting community groups, going out there and talking to them in their own backyard. And interestingly enough, I learned an awful lot about what goes on out there by that process. Most of those meetings would run for 2 to 3 hours. And we use a particular presentation, the same sort of presentation, and a lot to do with what we've actually been utilising in our other consultations with the community. Almost without exception, when we go through that presentations of what happened at the beginning, where we are now, the need for loans, for the changes we've made, for people to consider, particularly when they had children. No one wanted to pay more rates. Nobody. And often when I went into those rooms, people were saying, that was it. That was the position. No more rates. But as we went through it, what I did is I said, well, I'm the only person, somewhat unfortunately, who has to represent 350,000 odd people. I have to make a decision for the good of everybody. And what one found is when we went through that process, people slowly changed. And I particularly remember one individual, actually was up at Mangrove Mountain, who was pretty strong in his words at the beginning, but when he worked it through to say, well, if that's the situation, I have to think about what my children are going to require and what they're going to need. Because what I said to them, all of these, a lot of them older people who probably were struggling, I said, we have to look at a decision that is made for everybody. We have kids that need to go on sports field. We need to have transport routes that connect us to where we work. We need a whole bunch of things that need to happen. Now, if there's a risk of having to reduce those, and we're in a situation where this organisation had to recover pretty much under what would be a standard administrative or receivership as per the private sector, we had to move according to what the bank said. So those loans that we got, the emergency loans we got, came with very big strings attached. we've completed most of that, and we're well on track right now, as I'll talk a little bit later about. But I think the story of me going out there, meeting these groups of people and taking them through, and as I said, the discussions went for 2 to 3 hours. And over that period of time, people changed their views and said, and I think out of the total, I think it was close to 300 to 400 people I've seen through that process and talked to. I think it's less than a handful who at the end of it still were vociferous about, didn't want the rates. But interestingly, they were saying it was more along the lines, the state government should be paying for this, which of course we know well and truly they're not going to. So I just put that in there that my experience is quite different from Mr. Brooks in going out there and talking to all those people. As I said, once they're praised of all the facts, and I've never shied away from the facts. I was here on day one with Dick Pearson, so I've seen it all through this whole process. I've been involved in all the negotiations along in the early days with the CFO, Ms. Cowley. So if there's one person or two people who are in command of all the facts, it is Ms. Cowley and myself. Having gone into the administrator's role, I've had that opportunity now to talk to the community, which I have been doing as many times as we could do during this period. And as I said, the very last of those was in fact Monday night, where I spoke with a group of people at Mooney. And it was a great turnout. We had a fabulous conversation. Started at 6:30 and I left at 9 in the pouring rain, as some of you might recall. That was not a great trip back out of there, I've got to say. But anyway, but that's how many, there was probably, I'm guessing there was 3 or 4 on Zoom, but there was close to 20 in the room. Now that for a little area like Mooney is fabulous. But that's the sort of conversations we had, and it was intelligent conversation. It was an understanding of the facts. I could explain pretty much most things, and they could make their judgments from it. So again, Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry, but my experiences are very different from yours. So what I am going to do first here, because it is an extensive set of documents I've got here, and all the attachments are being loaded up. They're still in cyberspace. They're still in cyberspace as they're going through the system. The long-term financial plan I do have here, so I am actually tabling it, and that will be actually going up on the internet tomorrow. But as I said, I've got it here. I have thoroughly perused all of the submissions, all the documentation that has come through, so I'm very comfortable having got a complete understanding. And as I said, I've done my own research by going out there and talking to numerous groups of people, and I think the total amount is something like somewhere between 300 or 400 people in total. So with that, I'm going to ask the Chief Executive Officer, who's had the ultimate carriage of all this process, to, I guess, introduce us to this and take you through some of the key aspects of it.
I'm going over some ground that's been gone over a number of times, but I thought I'd just do this in a reasonably concise way. In October 2020, Council was confronted by a financial crisis, the genesis of which is being the subject of a public inquiry, and no doubt there will be a report provided in the coming calendar year about that. The Council had 2 serious problems. One was essentially what we call our operating position, or profit and loss, and the other one was cash, and in particular what we call unrestricted cash, that is the cash that we were entitled to spend. We had a major issue in both of those spaces. The 2 previous financial years, we'd lost $90 million in one year and $72 million in the year before. Our cash had been funding those operating deficits and was in a negative of around $200 million of cash that had been unlawfully used from restricted funds. And in fact, in October 2020, we actually required governmental support to meet our payroll commitments. At that point in time, a financial recovery plan, or not long after, the then administrator sitting in this seat and the CFO and Mr. Pearson acting as administrator developed a financial recovery plan, and that financial recovery plan has been applied and stuck to essentially quite religiously by this organisation. And it addressed both the underlying operating position issues, the profit and loss, and it also addressed your cash situation. To address your cash situation, we reduced Council's capital works program by about $60 million, $60 to $70 million, because increased capital works programs were burning cash. And we had to get emergency loans of $150 million to rectify our cash position. We also then instituted a range of significant savings programs, and that included an organisational restructure and a reduction in staff numbers. And staff numbers have reduced by between 20 to 25% to save an overall target on $30 million year on year. That restructure included reducing the number of executives from 9 to 5, the number of senior and middle managers from 39 to 25, and I think a 33% reduction in the next level of management. So close to 40% reduction in management numbers. It also included a reduction in our materials and services of around $20 million going forward. So if we had a $90 million structural deficit, the vast majority of that structural deficit has been met by reductions in costs by council. Additionally to that, we reduced some service levels, where there were some comparatively minor reductions in service levels, but ones that are being met by the community. And some of them are being felt by the community, and a good example was just before Christmas, a member of the public raised issues about roadside vegetation management, and that's been one of the things that has had to unfortunately suffer a little due to our reduced service levels. And I'm pleased to say that we've stuck to the plan. We report our financials on a monthly basis, and they show an initial improvement over budget in the first quarter and an on-budget performance for the second quarter. And we're confident that the original budget targets of a small surplus for the current financial year will be met. But a significant part of that financial recovery process was a special rate variation of 15%, which meets some of the cost of recovering the financial deficit and some of the cost of servicing the additional loans. The underlying issue is that this organisation has had to turn around in a COVID environment, which makes things very, very difficult to reimagine and reshape an organisation when you're working remotely. Close to 25% reduction in staff, 25% reduction in costs is extremely difficult. And part of that process has required an application to IPART for a 15% rate increase, which, as I said, is a comparatively small portion of the financial turnaround that we've required for in the organisation. IPART granted us a 3-year increase. We needed at least a 10-year increase in that area to be able to service our loans and maintain the financial position of the organisation, ensure that we don't go into that area. So I just really wanted to reinforce that this organisation has actually addressed significantly productivity issues. A couple of examples are that our materials and services costs year on year from before the financial crisis to now, we're 14.4% less in materials and services, and we monitor our wages and salaries, and our wages and salaries numbers on a weekly basis are much closer to what they were in 2015-16 than they were last year, even though the cost base, award increases and population increases mean that they realistically should have been increased by about 20%. So they're considerably less than they were last year, and very close to the numbers they were 5 years ago, despite those inflationary factors. But the council's in a position where if we don't have certainty of our income going forward, we have to consider what our options are going forward, and that places services at threat. Mr. Brooks, correctly states that this organisation did need to reform and it did need to cut costs, but it has. And any perusal of our organisational data will show that we have reduced those costs significantly from our previous operating position. So I just hand over.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. And I also asked the CFO to make some commentary, particularly around the long-term financial plan, but also about the whole process that we've done. You might want to make a couple of comments about Mr. Brooks' concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. And thank you, Mr. Brooks. I'll address some of your commentary. There was a comments about the calculation of the split of the $110 million over the 10 years and the rough calculation of making it $11 million per year. Ignoring the expected incorrectness of the fact that principal repayments are not the same year on year. The clarification for that is very obvious and provided in resolution number 9, which I'd ask the team if they can show on the screen, please. As it's shown there, it shows that council staff are asking for council to resolve to apply to IPART to maintain the temporary special rate variation of 15% for further 7 years to enable council to do the following 4 items. Mr. Brooks mentioned the $150 million, which is the calculation of the 110 divided by 10, but that is item number 1 only. Obviously, number 2, it says to secure council's financial sustainability by maintaining the current level of services and to fund the ongoing maintenance of assets. I know that we've mentioned that before. I'm not sure how many times we're going to revolve around in circles around this, but just to make it clear in this council meeting, the rate peg that IPART provided for council for next year is 1%, and it's calculated on a rate base of about $175 million. The employee costs is around $175 million as well. However, the award increase for that is 2%. Council can stand still and it would still be going backwards. Thank you for leaving, yep. And that is part of the financial sustainability. In addition, we have 0.5% super guarantee increase, and that is again something that is going to cost council extra money without actually creating further, with council standing still. In addition to that, council is delivering additional assets and capital expenditure. That comes with additional depreciation. That is also part of council's financial sustainability. So the notion that we're only seeking to repay $15 million and therefore we're pocketing the $11 million and we were hiding it, it's not hidden, it's written in number 2. And it's quite clear. There was the comment around the delivery program and the lack of prioritization. And just for the absence of doubt, the activity listed in the activities listed in the delivery program have been prioritized based on current stage of completion, resource availability, and the consideration to public need, safety, and risk. The delivery program, including the operational plan, is in response to the community strategic plan that has identified the community's wishes and aspirations into the future. So council has actually done all of our prioritisation based on the community's wishes. A further review of the delivery program will also be undertaken with another exhibition planned for April 2022. And the feedback that the community provides will be used to inform this review. So this isn't a dogmatic document. It has been delivered and provided and prioritized and used in collaboration with the community's wishes. There was the notion about ignoring the sentiment of the community. Quite the opposite. The special community groups that council had participated in had informed council's view. And I will go into that if I can ask the team to put up the community awareness and engagement. Yes, thank you so much. If we go on to the next slide, in addition to what Mr. Administrator mentioned, we'd like to clarify that in generating the community awareness during the period of October 2021 to January 2022 for the SV application, Council has delivered 2 lots of newsletters to 121,000 ratepayers. Our web page views have been over 26,000 views on yourvoiceourcoast.com website. We've had news coverage across more than 5 local media outlets. We've run fortnightly advertorial in local newspaper. Our social media reach has been over 250,000 views, and we have weekly e-news to over 12,000 subscribers. In terms of seeking feedback on the proposal, we undertook a community online survey where 722 respondents opted into that. We also had 744 respondents to telephone and online recovery survey with 336 telephone survey respondents. There were 34 attendees to the individual 9 administrator open office meetings. There were 364 attendees to 8 community association and other group meetings with the administrator. We responded to over 70 customer queries and 66 submissions to exhibition of the strategic documents. We've also held a business leaders forum, and we've had 3 lots of community reference group meetings. In addition, there would be additional opportunities for feedback about Council's IPART submission, which will go direct to IPART from early February 2022, and also to Council's draft key strategic and planning documents in April 2022. In addition, thank you for that, I'd like to also provide the next PowerPoint to show the productivity improvement plan and excerpts for that. And for this, we'd like to thank Mr. Brooks for putting it up on Council's agenda and prompting Council to make it very clear as to what Council has delivered in this space. If we go to the next slide, these are examples of some of the structural productivity savings that Council has delivered. If I can ask the next page from the team. There've been $150,000 reduction in costs from the consolidation of 2 former call centres into 1. $120,000 reduction in costs from the consolidation of 2 former after-hours call centres into 1. $50,000 reduction in costs from the consolidation of 3 corporate websites into 1. $40,000 reduction in costs from the consolidation of 2 online engagement platforms into 1. There's been $200K in additional revenue from the harmonising of vehicle access crossings. $1.5 million reduction in the software license and maintenance costs from the consolidation of 2 application systems into one. $300K reduction in costs from the consolidation of printer contracts. $500K reduction in costs from on-site excavation and reuse of resources. All of these documents are in the attachments. So if you didn't get to see that online, the information is included in there. There's 1.5 million reduction in costs from seizing, hauling and landfilling waste. There we go. And if we go to the next page, thank you, team. 40,000 reduction in costs from the implementation of interactive road signage compared to constructing traffic calming devices. 40,000 additional income from the alignment of all fees and charges for community facilities and meeting rooms. 152,000 in additional income annually from fuel tax credit claims from the implementation of GPS, and a couple of other items. These are only items that are scratching the surface, but as I said, this is in reflection of what we have heard from the community that the community needs, and that's why we have provided that. In terms of the documents that are being provided, the long-term financial plan and the basis of this application is a repeat on what was already applied last year, with some changes associated with that are driven by IPART. We based our numbers on a 2.5% rate peg increase. However, IPART have had a rate peg increase of 1%, and that's driving the changes. The rest of the information hasn't changed substantially, and as mentioned by the Chief Executive Officer, Council has maintained and stuck and delivered everything to the financial recovery plan, and we have met all targets. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Cowley, and I presume we can also add to that productivity gains the fact that we've sold one of our administration buildings, and that'll probably save us, what, nearly $2 million in operation expenditure, including depreciation. So there are some massive changes that have occurred there, and I'm very comfortable that once and if we can get ourselves settled down and our cash flows becoming positive again, then I'm very confident with the focus that's on the organisation at the moment, that there will be far more productivity gains to get into the future. But what we've achieved, I guess, in a very, very short period of time, against the background of a massive downsizing, certainly probably one of the largest that any council in Australia has ever had to do, I still think that's nothing short of a miracle, that's some of those achievements. So I guess it's congratulations to both the CEO and the CFO and the executive team for actually, getting on and getting those things happening. I can let you know now that all the documents apart from the LTFP are now up on the web. So they're actually up and loaded. They took forever to actually load because it's a vast amount. And as I said, I have the LTFP here, and I have considered it, and that will be going up tomorrow. So, and I've tabled it for the minutes and for the purposes of the minutes. Now, I have a couple of slides that I would like to sort of put up, so we'll work towards those. I do apologise in one sense. I think there's a slide before that one, actually. Or it's the other way around. That's the one. Now, this is largely what the Chief Executive Officer was talking about. It is just the slide from the financial results, the monthly financial results, which are at the end of 6 months for this financial year. And that, of course, does show a variance from budget for the year to date, which is our 6 monthly results, of something like $13 million that we are ahead of budget at this point in time. Now, we are forecasting that will end up very close to what we originally set in the budget, which is, and I'm hopeful with the CEO that we will get to the 7 million we said. At the moment, it's showing about a 3 million surplus. Now, the reason why we're it sounds like we're going to lose a little bit of money in the short term. It's just simply timing of when things happen. We're introducing a lot of rigour into the organisation in terms of how the senior staff and staff budget managers through the organisation budget. Now that's taking a little bit of time to get fully in place. So we do ask unit managers now to look after an area of the business to, one, budget for their total expenditure for the year. Secondly, to cut that up into monthly segments, but doing it in a way where they don't just divide the number by 12. They have to divide it by, they have to work it out on the basis of when the expenditure is going to occur. So that way, as we go through the year and we report monthly, it should be being very close to our actual results, and our forecast should again be very accurate as a result of that. Now, I happen to know that the CEO has made it very clear to those budget managers who can't get this right that it won't be tolerated in the organisation into the future. One of the commitments that I made and I resolved early on that we would have financial reporting, and it is about getting budget managers understanding what that means and being very accurate about how they're travelling at the moment and where they're going to end up at the end of the year. So based on that, as I said, it's showing a surplus of 13 at this stage, but from experience, both the CEO, myself and the CFO know that will actually, we haven't got it 100% right, but it's fairly good, so we still expect to be very much in the position of making a surplus at the end of the financial year. Now, there's a set of metrics which are also attached in the attachments that you'll be able to find on the web, which is the next slide. And it's an interesting slide, and actually Local Government Solutions, who provide the software for all councils to provide their financial results to Audit New South Wales. This is just a table that they take up, and it's a table that measures your employee costs, your employee expenditure line against your total operating expenditure. And I've selected a range of performances here. Now, the data that we've used and LGS used was, of course, our last audited data, which was for the 1920 year. And you can see there that the percentage of employee expenses to their total operating expenses, the Inner West is showing it pretty high up there, at close to 50% of their costs are staff costs. And then you can see as you go down. Now, some of the better run merged councils, which are Canterbury, Bankstown, Georges River and Northern Beaches, you can all see there that they're running at about 39% of their total costs are staff costs. The Central Coast, even with our 1920 financial results as audited, show that our employee costs were 220 million. And even there, we are below those other councils. But what I did, just for a little bit of fun, was to take our 21-22 from that table you saw previously, and making allowance, I think, for the fact that we exclude some internal things, so it's a little bit different to that table that you've seen. But when we put our employee cost line in there, our forecasted line in there at 172.6, and our total operating expenditure, we end up with a number of 30.6. Now, if anyone needed any proof that there are being productivity gains, there it is. For all the statements that have been out there about our high cost of staff, we've got far more staff than anybody else and everything else, let's go back to the actual data. And the data is quite clear here that in actual fact, based on our forecast to the end of this financial year, we are operating at 30. And you will see in the, I can't put it in exactly because I haven't got all the councils there, but you can see that we're in probably the top 20 or close to the top 20 councils in terms of that particular performance measure. And as I said earlier, that to be achieved with the productivity gains we've already done in a year where it was absolute turmoil and we're taking the costs out of the organisation big time is a pretty good achievement. So it is with quite a bit of confidence that I look forward to the future for this organisation, on the assumption that we are successful with our IPART applications, we can look forward to a strong period of stability. We can look forward to further productivity gains, which will be reinvested into the business, and that will help to lift some of those standards which have, as I and the previous administrator said at the beginning, there would be some drops in the service levels with our revised budgets. So I would hope that we can retain a lot of that and bring it back. Now, I need to really and utterly and completely reiterate to the community, we are not seeking any rate increases. Some of the media have said we want to continue the current rate increases. That is misleading. It implies that there's a 15% or whatever, the 13% plus the rate back for every year. That is not the case. We are talking about maintaining the current rate notice that every ratepayer has received. We're talking about the only addition to that is the 1% that IPART have granted us. Now that's for next year. The following years will still be the 13% plus whatever percentage IPART grant for all councils in that particular year. So there are no more rate increases. The word increase has to leave the vocabularies because it's misleading. The rate increase was what we asked for last year and we received, but it was for only 3 years. With the bank's requirement that we need that cash flow for 10 years, all we have done is repeat last year's application, but now ask specifically for IPART to take it out for a further 7 years on top of the 3 years that we were granted. I repeat, there are no more rate increases. So I would like the media to actually get the words correct so that we don't talk about increases anymore. And as I said, the reason behind this, the number one reasoning, is in fact the bank's pressure to say we must do it. The Chief Executive mentioned the Council has, if you like, absorbed through cost cutting, reductions of staff, 70% of what had to be made up. That rate increase last year gave the other 30%. And as the Chief Executive mentioned again, our staff costs at the moment approximately are the same as the staff costs of the previous Wyong and Gosford councils back in 2015, the 15-16 year. And if you added on the award increases to that, it means we're operating something like 14% less in real terms, in real today dollars, than we were back then. So with those comments and the fact that I've been through this, and I have to say, I don't think anything else has consumed more of an administrator's time than going through the IPART processes, and I would add going through Audit New South Wales processes. And I have to say, I am disappointed with Audit New South Wales. We produced our financials and sent them to Audit New South Wales back in mid-August. And it's very disappointing that we are not able to include in this submission audited results for the 2021 financial year. And it's very disappointing also that this council, I'm aware, is being asked to do things that other councils aren't. And that is a very different scenario than if we were, as we were, treated by the state government as being in a receivership and having to sort commercial solutions. So with that, I want to note that the following documents were all publicly exhibited. I want to specifically note that I have reviewed all the public submissions that have come in. As I said, I have been quite a part of some of those submissions, and I've been very much part and parcel of the whole thing all the way through. I also just want to note specifically that the Chief Executive Officer will have authority to put any temporary amendments or typos or all those sorts of things in the kind of rush that we had to put all this together. So there possibly may be the odd typo change and so on. The Chief Executive is authorised to make sure they're correct when they get sent to IPART on Monday next week. So with that, I'm going to resolve all of that wide range of resolutions that are shown on the screen, and thank Mr. Brooks once again for contributing, because we do appreciate your comments, even if we might not agree with them. And I think we'll close the meeting at that at 1:57 p.m. Thank you.